part 1 of this chapter, I will be taking some outdoor mushroom caps and making spore prints out of them. This is the Namiko mushroom. It has quite a slimy cap, as you can see, and because these are outdoor mushrooms, I see no reason to use surgical gloves when making the spore prints. They've already been exposed to all of the natural contaminants. My hands, of course, were washed. Now the procedure is to cut the stem off, and I will reach into my glove box and lay these on a sheet of paper to print. Now because these are outdoor mushrooms, we will be taking the spores that drop from here and using them to inoculate agar, which in the flat plane of a petri dish, it will be very easy to separate the healthy mycelium away from any contaminants that might develop. Even when using a glove box, I found it's a good idea to put a sheet of paper or something else over the top of printing caps. The main reason for this within a glove box is to prevent moisture loss from the cap. If the cap starts to dry out, it will quit dropping its spores. So this just helps it to make a little bit darker print for us. Now, depending on the species you're growing, anywhere from about 6 to 24 hours, you should have a nice spore print, so you can go ahead and remove it from the glove box. If your paper is wet like this is here, be sure and let it dry out well before you put it away. If you try to put up a wet spore print, you're just going to encourage bacteria to grow on it. As we take a look through the zoom microscope, you can see the spores have been deposited in a pattern that exactly matches the gills of the cap, and you can actually see a bit of 3D buildup of spores here. What we'll be doing later is taking an inoculating loop and very carefully along these lines scraping up just a few spores, and then we'll deposit those on agar. Part 2 of this chapter covers printing an indoor mushroom for the purpose of making a spore syringe. The process is really exactly the same, except we'll take a bit greater precautions to ensure cleanliness. I'll be wearing gloves this time, and I'll be printing on aluminum foil instead of paper. It's also important to take the aluminum foil and tear off about a foot or two from the roll first, and use that for your kitchen, and then tear off the section you're going to print on. Aluminum foil is made in a very high temperature, high speed process, so it's very clean. You don't need to wipe it with alcohol or anything else as long as you tear off a piece first. We'll lay the mushroom cap on the foil and then cover it with a sheet of Tyvek. You could also use a large bowl or something else, but the idea is to prevent drafts or anything else from blowing contaminants into your print. In part 3 of this chapter, I'm going to cover the steps to make a spore syringe using a spore print and distilled water. The process is very simple, but you need to be extra clean because at any point it's very easy to introduce contaminants. The procedure that we're going to follow is to take a spore print that was made from an indoor mushroom, and the spore print was taken under as clean of conditions as possible. I'll be taking a little bit of sterilized distilled water, putting that on the print, and then using an inoculating loop to stir the spores into that water. I will then pour that water into a shot glass and add more distilled water, stir that in, and then draw that out into the syringe. As I get started here, what you see across the front of the flow hood from left to right wrapped in foil, on the left is a spore syringe, in the middle is a shot glass, and over on the right is a half-pint jar of distilled water. All of these have been cooked in a pressure cooker at 15 pounds per square inch for half an hour. Now, I've also washed my gloves with alcohol. You saw me wash the inoculating loop with alcohol. I should also point out, before beginning work, the entire work area was washed down with alcohol very well. And the flow hood has been running for about an hour to scrub the air in the general room. Now, this operation can be done in a glove box as well. You want very still air, and working in a glove box, you also want to work as quickly as possible and as clean as possible, just like I'm doing here. But of course, it's much easier to film in front of a flow hood, so that's what I'm doing. These bright studio lights I'm running completely drown out the color of the flame from that torch, so I guess you'll just have to take my word for it that it actually is burning right now. You want to put a few drops of water on your print and then stir it with the inoculating loop in order to get the spores off of the foil and into suspension in the water. Be sure and use an inoculating loop or something else with rounded edges. Whatever you do, don't use your syringe needle for this. The syringe needle is hard and very sharp, and it will rip the spores open, and you'll have extremely poor performance later because so many of your spores will have been damaged. The amount of water you're going to put into the shot glass depends on how many syringes you intend to fill that day. I'm only going to make one, so I'm putting enough in that I can mix the spores and then draw back one full syringe. If you were going to make, say, 10 syringes, you could simply get your spore print wet, loosen up all of the spores from the entire print, and then dump that into your half-pint jar of water and mix that in well, and you could probably make anywhere from 10 to 15 syringes on a print this size. You want to use your inoculating loop to stir the spores around and get them into solution before you draw them into your syringe. Now, one thing that's very common with people that make these syringes, if you're not going to use it right away, put a couple of drops of sex lube, such as Astroglide, into the water before you pressure cook it. You want to use about 2 drops per 100 milliliters, and 100 milliliters is a little bit less than half of one of these half-pint jars. But you'll put, in this jar here, I think I used about 3 drops of sex lube. I put it in before sterilization, and that will keep your spores in suspension so they don't stick to the walls of your syringe. As with everything, practice makes perfect, so if you don't succeed on your first time, try again until you do. Good luck!